Well, good morning, everybody. Joining us right now, Tom Fitton. He's the president of Judicial Watch, live and in person right here in studio with us this morning. Tom, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's start with the big news of the weekend. Jeffrey Epstein dead. Saturday morning, we're all getting these push notifications, breaking news alerts that he's dead of an apparent suicide. Attorney General Bill Barr issuing a statement that he's looking into it. He's also instructed the Inspector General to look into it. What is your reaction to this? And I saw that Judicial Watch is already doing some digging of its own.
Yeah, we'll do the Freedom of Information Act and use the other tools available to other journalists to try to figure out what went on. But this is the American people want to have faith that the Justice Department and the justice system is running well, and certainly this undermines this.
Big time.
Jeffrey Epstein is one of those guys they need to keep alive in order to make sure that people think this country isn't out of control in terms of law and order. And he goes into the federal prison system and dies. And he's someone who may or may not have evidence against a lot of powerful people, including the Clintons and company like that, and Prince Andrew, given the documents that were released this last week in his civil cases. So when someone goes into a federal prison, seemingly assaulted and put on suicide watch, he comes off suicide watch. According to the news reports this weekend, the guards aren't looking after him, and now the medical examiner is saying there's been a delay in ascertaining how he died. People have questions to ask.
Yep.
Well, he's a supervisor of the Justice Department. I guess ultimately he has responsibility. Whether literally he has responsibility, whether practically speaking he had responsibility, I think is another question, which is always the question in situations like this. Look, I'm no fan of Epstein. I think there's a real question as to whether or not the Justice Department was able to prosecute him the second time like they were proposing to do.
Uh-huh.
And certainly if they're going to have a prosecution that was as controversial as that, then to deny him bail and put him into a facility and ends up dead, their job is to make sure he's alive. And to answer your point, Mary, the Attorney General recognizes something needs to be done. That's why he immediately called for an Inspector General's investigation along with an FBI investigation. So, I don't think that's going to be sufficient for a lot of people. There's going to be calls for outside investigations as well, given the Justice Department's in the least bungling of the handling of this man's
there's just so much mistrust of our institutions and of our elites and of our government. And, this idea, all these conspiracy theories that have been flourishing through the weekend around all of this, that is a symptom of that mistrust. Americans just don't have it for our institutions anymore. And as you pointed out at the beginning of this segment, this idea that the Justice Department would allow somebody so high profile, so important to keep alive, to die on their watch is just one more piece of evidence in a long-running story that you've been telling at Judicial Watch, which is there are problems in our government at the highest levels, and whether it's incompetence or it's actual corruption, Americans are having a very difficult time trusting that those institutions are working for them.
That's right, because remember, the concern about the Justice Department is they let this guy off the hook.
Right.
And they finally bring him in again, and as I said, it's controversial that they did so at all, and he ends up dead. They got to keep this guy alive at least through the prosecution and conviction. People in the prison system die too often. This is one of the reasons there is, practically speaking, a death penalty for some, because people get killed if they're controversial in prison systems. That ought not to happen, but that's the reality. And given that reality, and given the fact this guy had already tried to commit suicide or may have been assaulted, that they didn't have sufficient resources deployed to keep him alive, there are a lot of tough questions that need to be answered by senior officials of the Justice Department. Or easier, if there was no one there to be a witness to an assault from the outside, a suspicious mind might ask.
Mm-hmm.
To have the psychiatric review, give him a get out of suicide watch free card, and then have the unusual circumstances of not having a cellmate, and having the unusual circumstance of according to the latest reports, The watch guards hadn't come by his cell in hours, and then he ends up dead.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
All right, much more with Tom Fitton in a moment. We're going to get into those Bruce Orr 302s that Judicial Watch obtained last week.